Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we plunge headfirst into the fascinating worlds of artistry, innovation, and the stories behind the sounds that shape our cultural landscape. Today, we're setting our compass for the intricate sonic heart of two albums that didn't just redefine music, they meticulously sculpted, immersive auditory worlds. Steely Dan's Eja and Gaucho.
Precisely. We're talking about records that stand as true monuments to what's possible when an almost obsessive studio craft meets an unparalleled musical vision. Donald Fagen and Walter Becker weren't content to be merely songwriters. They were master architects of sound, consistently pushing boundaries, transforming jazz, rock, and R&B into something uniquely their own.
Our mission today is to truly inhabit that incredibly detailed sonic tapestry they wove. We're going to explore how they relentlessly pushed the limits of studio production, hand-picking virtuoso musicians, inventing new technology, all in that relentless chase for what they called that sound.
Right.
The goal for you, our listener, is to uncover the profound secrets behind their crystal-clear audio and flawless production, showing how every element, from the incredibly smooth rhythm section to the sparkling horn solos, was a deliberate, often painstakingly achieved choice.
Each one reflecting the album's core mood and lyrical genius.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
This isn't just about passively listening to music. It's an auditory exploration designed for you to gain a genuine shortcut to being truly well-informed about two absolute masterpieces.
So let's start by immersing ourselves in Eja. Released in 1977, Fagen often looked back on it as the culmination of a journey, a pivotal moment when all their disparate musical obsessions finally coalesced into a perfectly polished whole.
Okay.
What's truly insightful about Eja is how it represents Steely Dan's arrival at a new level of sophistication after the more, cynical edge of earlier works like The Royal Scam. You immediately sense a definite shift here towards a richer, more jazz-infused palette, though they never once shed that signature dark humor you expect from them.
You mentioned that shift towards sophistication on Anja. I remember reading about a humorous sort of self-penned write-up they released at the time, hinting at a new maturity in their work. Was that just a playful jab, or did it genuinely reflect how serious they were about this particular album's direction? They seemed incredibly committed to creating what they described as a sumptuous and expansive record.
That's a great question because it was kind of both. While there was certainly a wink and a nudge in that self-assessment, there's absolutely a core truth to it. They were indeed incredibly serious about making Aja feel like an album-length mood piece, something cohesive and deeply atmospheric.
Right.
Musically, Aja really does drape their sardonic narratives in velvet. The overall mood is cool and urbane. Imagine a late-night jazz club transplanted into 1970s Los Angeles.
Okay.
Fagen, in particular, was captivated by Far East imagery and exotic chords. The very name Aja, pronounced Asia, came from a friend's Korean wife and symbolized to him a sensual, sophisticated aura.
And you can hear that cosmopolitan polish throughout the entire album, from the sinewy R&B rhythms of Black Cow to the truly expansive jazz suite of the title track.
Definitely.
Even the album cover, with its elegant black and crimson design and the deliberate absence of their faces, hinted that the focus was purely on atmosphere and sound.
They wanted you, the listener, to sink into this meticulously crafted world of pristine production, sly storytelling, and rich musical interplay. While earlier albums might have leaned more into rock, Aja was the record where they fully embraced being those studio wizards painting on a broader, more nuanced canvas.
Right.
But here's an important insight. Don't let that glossy exterior fool you. Lyrically, the classic Steely Dan cynicism is absolutely alive and well just beneath that luxurious surface.
Still there?
Oh, yeah. The songs still delve deep into their favorite themes. Love on the Rocks, The Beautiful Losers, escapist dreams, and decadent scenes. The key difference on Aja is that these tales are often told by a slightly older, more world-weary narrator, with surprisingly a touch more empathy subtly creeping into the narratives.
Interesting.
Fagen himself admitted that Deacon Blues is about as close to autobiography as their tunes get, drawn from the sense of alienation he and Walter Becker felt growing up in the suburbs.
Okay.
So while the album's musical tone might be smoother, it's still steeped in that familiar blend of irony and melancholy, a combination that has resonated with listeners for decades and keeps them coming back.
That dual nature of Aja, the elegant sound and the underlying cynicism, is fascinating. Having set the mood, let's now peel back the curtain and truly understand the legendary and often obsessive production process that birthed this sound. By 1977, the recording studio wasn't just where Steely Dan made music. It was Steely Dan.
Pretty much, yeah.
They had actually stopped touring by then, pouring all their creative energy into writing and recording with literally the best musicians they could possibly find.
And that commitment led to a process that was famously meticulous. Some might even say obsessive. It definitely earned them a bit of a mad scientist reputation.
I bet.
They recorded over a period of about a year, from late 1976 through mid-77, spanning multiple top studios across Los Angeles and even New York for some overdubs.
Well, still a year.
Yeah. This entire endeavor was driven by an uncompromising search for that sound, that elusive, perfect sonic blend. Their producer, Gary Katz, and engineer Roger Nichols were absolutely essential partners in this, willing to chase Fagen and Becker's incredibly detailed instructions and endure countless takes without complaint.
So, to capture that silky yet punchy sonic quality they envisioned, how did they go about selecting their musicians? I've heard they would hand-pick A-list session players for each track, sometimes even using several different lineups for the same song. That must have been quite a scene.
It truly was a unique environment. They would bring in virtuosos like legendary drummer Bernard Purdie or guitar ace Larry Carlton, pushing them to deliver precisely the perfect feel for each part.
Right.
What's truly remarkable is that if one player didn't nail what they heard in their heads, they simply wouldn't settle. They'd thank them and call up another hotshot musician the very next day.
It's just like that.
Yeah. Engineer Elliot Shiner famously noted, and I'm quoting him here, "Every track, every overdub had to be the perfect overdub. They didn't settle for anything."
Wow.
This was, for many musicians, a real trial by fire. If you survived a Steely Dan session, you earned serious credibility within the industry. The insight here is that they were less about capturing a live band's vibe and more about sculpting an ideal sonic landscape, meticulously layering individual perfect contributions.
Their attention to detail then became legendary, almost notorious by this point. I've read stories of them spending hours just auditioning different keyboard voicings or meticulously tweaking a horn chart. Can you give us another example of that level of perfectionism in action on Aja?
Certainly. On the title track, Eja itself, they went to the extreme length of recording a full 40-piece jazz orchestra.
40 pieces, wow.
Imagine that, 40 musicians. Yet in the final mix, they stripped it back, using only a few brass accents to achieve the ideal texture. It speaks volumes about their commitment to the final sound over showcasing every grand gesture. They also eagerly embraced the latest recording technology of the time, utilizing sophisticated multi-track recorders, DBX noise reduction, and their engineer Roger Nichols' custom-built gadgets, always in pursuit of sonic purity.
Speaking of that meticulousness,
Yeah.
I'm fascinated by the stories of things still going wrong, like the legendary lost tracks. What exactly happened with the master tapes for Osha and Black Cow? It seems almost unbelievable given their precision.
It's a truly bizarre footnote in their history. Decades later, they actually discovered that the multi-track master tapes for Oja and Black Cow had gone missing, somehow misplaced in some storage locker.
No way.
Yeah. Fagen, with his dry wit, even half-seriously offered a $600 reward for their return. No takers, alas, which means audiophiles. You'll unfortunately have to live without a 5.1 surround mix on those two tracks.
Oh, man.
It's a quirky detail that highlights how even the most controlled environments can have their moments of chaos.
Yet, despite that occasional hair-pulling, all that painstaking work paid off in spades. The album's sound quality was, and still is, frequently hailed as audiophile heaven. In fact, Aja earned the 1978 Grammy Award for Best Engineered Recording, a significant nod to Roger Nichols, Elliot Shiner, Al Schmitt, and Bill Schnee's incredible craft. What exactly did that mean for the listener?
Well, it meant that listening to the finished album, they finally heard on vinyl what they had only imagined. A deep, wide soundstage where every instrument sits in perfect balance and clarity. From the incredibly smooth rhythm section to the sparkling horn solos, Aja truly set a new high bar for record production in the 1970s. The real insight here is how Fagen and Becker, through this relentless pursuit, created an environment where each musician's precise contribution interlocked seamlessly, forming a larger organic whole that transcended individual brilliance.
Yeah.
The sound was so immaculate, it became a reference disc for hi-fi buffs, one that still gets used to demo expensive speakers to this day.
That's amazing. It really shows you that during production, they weren't thinking about legacy. They were simply chasing the music. And if that meant doing 40 takes of a guitar solo or splicing together the best bits of multiple drum tracks, so be it.
Exactly.
They had the luxury of time, a big budget, and an understanding record label. It sounds like making Aja was both torture and magic. Walter Becker used to joke that they had a license for abuse in the studio, meaning they could demand endless takes without killing their career because, thankfully, the albums kept selling.
Right, the success gave them that freedom.
With Aja, that perfectionism truly reached its peak. With an understanding of Aja's painstaking creation, let's now immerse ourselves in the very heart of the album, those 7 iconic tracks. And what better place to start than with the epic centerpiece itself, the title track, Aja.
Aja is really where they stretched out for the first time. It's an 8-minute journey that took a simple pop song structure and expanded it into what truly feels like a quasi-sweet, one-part Latin-tinged jazz ballad, one-part explosive instrumental jam. This was, by far, the most ambitious piece they had attempted up to that point. The song actually began as a gentle, mysterious tune with an Asian flavor, fitting the title, built on a silky groove. But in the studio, it dramatically morphed into this epic showcasing some of the finest musicianship on the entire album.
The first half of Aja really drifts along in a dreamlike state. You can vividly imagine an idyllic retreat up on the hill where Chinese music under banyan trees sets a tranquil mood. The lyrics paint this almost fantastical escape, perhaps the narrator's refuge from the gritty reality of the city.
Mm.
The music perfectly mirrors that serenity. Chuck Rainey's bass and Paul Humphrey's gentle pulse give it a relaxed heartbeat, while Joe Sample's electric piano and Michael Omartian's acoustic piano play off each other, creating jazz harmonies as cool as a summer breeze. And Donald Fagen even indulged his penchant for unusual instruments by adding a little police whistle accent. That subtle tweet you hear is him.
Right. Then, about halfway through, the track truly elevates to another plane. This is where Aja truly earns its legendary reputation, with the unforgettable entrance of Steve Gadd, the drumming maestro, and Wayne Shorter, the jazz legend on tenor sax.
The dream team.
Exactly. Wayne Shorter's sax solo is stately and rhapsodic. They gave him complete free rein to improvise over the chord changes, and he delivered something incredibly melodic, searching, and totally haunting.
Yeah.
Hearing a member of Miles Davis's Inner Circle solo on their record was an absolute thrill, bringing serious jazz credibility and a profound sense of gravitas. The way his solo descends gracefully back into the refrain after its climax still gives me chills.
And Steve Gadd drummers still talk about what he did on Aja. The true genius here wasn't just his technical mastery of those insane polyrhythmic fills, which are essentially complex layered rhythms that sound almost impossible to play simultaneously, but Gadd pulls them off with effortless grace. It's that in a band known for its demanding, often fractured recording process, Gadd's single continuous take on Aja symbolized their rare ability to recognize and embrace spontaneous, unrepeatable magic, even amidst their relentless pursuit of perfection. It was a moment of inspired surrender to brilliance.
Absolutely. He basically created one continuous drum solo that builds and builds, moving from delicate cymbal work to thunderous fills, seemingly effortlessly. Incredibly, he nailed the entire drum part in one continuous take, start to finish.
One take. Amazing.
That wasn't edited or pieced together. It's a live execution of a complex drum arrangement, including those incredible polyrhythmic fills in the outro that have launched 1,000 air drum attempts.
I can picture it.
As one top session drummer, Kenny Aronoff, later said, everybody knows that this was absolute genius, one of the greatest drum performances that made it on the radio ever. Gadd basically sold the show on their song, and they were more than happy to let him do it. Despite its length and unconventional form, Aja never feels self-indulgent. It has a profound narrative flow. It peaks and resolves like a proper story, from the quiet introduction to the whirlwind drum and sax heroics, and back down to a whispered finish. If you stick around until the very end, you'll even catch a brief reprise of the main melody, as if the dream is gently fading out. It's often cited as a pinnacle of jazz rock, largely thanks to this title track.
If any song on Aja deserves the title anthem, it's Deacon Blues. This is their romantic ode to the beautiful loser, a lush ballad for the guy who feels like a fool but yearns to make a mark in his own quirky way.
Yeah.
It's been described as oddly uplifting, and indeed, many fans have taken Deacon Blues to heart as a deeply personal theme song. At over 7 minutes, it was hardly a commercial single by 1970s standards, yet it became one of their most beloved tracks and even cracked the top 20.
The music of Deacon Blues is moody and expansive, what they called an edge city ballad, evoking lonely city streets and neon reflections on wet pavement.
Yeah, I get that vibe.
It unfolds at a relaxed tempo, anchored by Bernard Purdy's drums, which have a signature shuffle feel. Purdy used his famous halftime Purdy shuffle groove here, laying back just enough to make the beat both soothing and bittersweet.
Hmm, the Purdy Shuffle.
Chuck Rainey plays a deceptively simple bass line that holds down the chords, while electric piano, again by Victor Feldman, and guitars chime in gentle conversation. They kept the arrangement spacious, allowing you to truly sink into the warm, late-night vibe of it.
Lyrically, Walter and Fagen poured a lot of themselves into Deacon Blues. The protagonist is a middle-aged dreamer imagining a hipper life. I'll learn to work the saxophone, I'll drink Scotch whiskey all night long and die behind the wheel, he muses, envisioning a jazz musician's boozy bravado.
Right, it's simultaneously tragic and aspirational.
Exactly. Walter famously described the character as a triple L loser who sees becoming a jazzman as the mythical pinnacle of loserdom. And indeed, the name Deacon Blues itself was intended ironically. They were inspired by the grandeur of college football team names. The University of Alabama's team is called Crimson Tide, which they thought was the most grandiose name.
Okay.
So they imagined this poor bum giving himself an equally grandiose name, Deacon Blues. As Fade explained, they call these winners the Crimson Tide, and I'm this loser, so they call me Deacon Blues. That's the twisted sense of humor at work, contrasting the glory of Crimson Tide versus the self-proclaimed loser with a dignified moniker.
That's brilliant. One of the absolute highlights of this track is the tenor sax solo by Pete Kreslebe, the very saxophonist from the Tonight Show band.
Oh, really? From Carson's band?
Yep. They wanted a certain sound, that smoky end-of-night jazz club sax that would play you out to commercial break on Carson's show. So they literally called up Kreslebe, had him come by after a TV taping, and he laid down an incredibly soulful solo in just a few takes. You can hear the authenticity in his tone. It's not a rock and roll sax scream, but a melancholy, melodic improvisation that perfectly fits the song's late-night aura. When Pete comes in, blowing over the bridge and again in the coda, it's like a gentle sigh cutting through the lush arrangement. His solo, along with the lovely horn arrangements by Tom Scott that cushion it, truly enliven the track beautifully.
Also notable are the background vocals, a trio of female singers delivering those harmonies that swell in the chorus. They give Deacon Blues a touch of gospel and Motown warmth behind Fagen's lead vocal. Their refrain, learn to work the saxophone, in the fade-out, almost sounds like a congregation echoing the narrator's prayer. In the end, Deacon Blues strikes an unexpectedly emotional chord. For all the irony in the concept, there's a genuine empathy for the character.
Yeah, you feel it.
The music has a dignified sadness. That's why people connect with it. They captured something profoundly real about aspirations and failures. To this day, hearing an arena of fans sing along to "They Call Alabama the Crimson Tide, Call Me Deacon Blues" is a moving experience. It's as if for those 7 minutes, everyone embraces the beautiful loser inside them and finds some grace in it.
After the reflective haze of side one, if you had the vinyl, you'd flip the record and be hit with pure pop sunshine with Peg.
Ah, Peg.
It's undeniably the tightest, most radio-friendly song on Aja, and indeed it was the album's big hit single, reaching number 11 on the charts. But don't be fooled by its breezy, upbeat feel. Behind the scenes, Peg was one of the most painstakingly constructed tracks they ever recorded.
Really? It sounds so effortless.
That's the irony. This 3 minutes and 58 seconds of music took weeks of sessions and enough tape to wrap around the globe, all for a final result that sounds utterly effortless. The irony, as you can imagine, was not lost on them.
Let's start with the sound itself. Peg is an addictive blend of rock, funk, and R&B, with a bouncy swing that makes people nod their heads the instant the first chord hits.
Definitely.
It's set in motion by Chuck Rainey's popping bass line and Rick Marotta's crisp drum groove. On top of that, they added a funky guitar comping pattern, courtesy of Steve Kahn, that uses a peculiar flanged effect. What exactly does a flanged effect sound like for those unfamiliar?
A flanged effect creates that distinctive, swirling, almost jet engine sound that pulls the guitar in and out of phase, giving it a somewhat psychedelic or otherworldly quality.
Okay.
Interesting tidbit. They asked Steve Kahn to come up with something for the intro, and he tried this long, ringing chord with an MXR flanger cranked up. He actually called it a tasteless and juvenile sound, but Fagen and Becker loved it precisely for that reason.
Huh. Of course they did.
That warped guitar chord became a key hook, appearing in the intro and then later before the solo. It's one of those weird sonic signatures that really screams 1977 in the best possible way.
Perhaps the most famous aspect of Peg is the background vocals. They enlisted Michael McDonald of Doobie Brothers fame to sing those high, multi-layered harmony parts in the chorus, Peg. It will come back to you. Michael has an incredible voice, a rich blue-eyed soul sound. But the way they used him here was almost experimental. They made him overdub his own voice multiple times to create these incredibly thick block harmonies. What was the experience like for MacDonald trying to achieve that specific sound?
The results were stellar. His tone added a bright, soulful sheen. However, achieving it was another story. They had Michael stack his vocals again and again, each time trying to match the phrasing exactly. He often jokes that it was like climbing Everest with all the repetitions.
Wow.
The running joke in the control room was that with every take, his voice got a little more strained and white-sounding until they had essentially distilled the pure essence of MacDonald.
That's hilarious.
All that work yielded amazingly tight harmonies. They almost sound like a synthesizer. They're so creamy. Those background vocals became a defining feature of Peg's catchy appeal.
And then there's the matter of the guitar solo, an infamous chapter in Steely Dan lore. Peg contains a short but brilliant solo break, about 20 bars long, and they were determined to get the perfect guitar feel for it.
Amazing.
Right. Not when you have two perfectionists at the helm.
Not at all.
I've heard they cycled through a who's who of guitarists for that solo. Who were some of the legends who tried, and what was the ultimate outcome?
It's an incredible anecdote that perfectly illustrates their uncompromising commitment. The first brave soul was Walter Becker himself. He gave it a shot, but they decided they needed something different.
Okay.
Next came guys like Robin Ford, then session legends including Larry Carlton, and even rock star Rick Derringer. Each played a version of the solo. Some were quite good, but not quite what they were hearing.
The classic line.
Right. They'd nod politely and say, "Thanks, we'll call you," then bring in another hotshot the next day. It became almost comical, the revolving door of guitar aces. At one point, Fagen joked in the making of a Saw film that they were up to 7 guitarists, maybe 8 players. That wasn't much of an exaggeration.
Wow. So after all that, who finally delivered the magic take?
Finally, in walks Jay Graydon, a noted session player known for his precision and taste. Jay hunkered down, and after a marathon session, Fagen recalled him spending hours in the studio, meticulously working on licks. He delivered the magic take.
Thank goodness.
The solo on the record is Jay Graydon's. A snappy, melodic blues-funk phrase with those jazzy bends, capped by a distinctive double-stop riff where he plays 2 notes simultaneously that just sings. It lasts only 26 seconds, but it was absolutely worth the week's worth of effort.
Amazing.
When Fagen first heard the finished solo over the track, he knew it was the one that had that unique blend of technical skill and personality they'd been chasing. Jay later said he left the studio unsure if he'd nailed it, only to hear the song on the radio weeks later and think, "Hey, I made it." Indeed he did.
That's a great story.
The real takeaway here is not just how many guitarists they auditioned, but that this relentless pursuit of a mere 20-second solo perfectly illustrates Steely Dan's artistic philosophy. An uncompromising commitment to even the tiniest detail, believing that every single note contributed to the immersive world they were building.
Lyrically, Peg is lighter fare, a sardonic little story about a young starlet in a paparazzi-type figure. "I know I love you better," the narrator croons sarcastically. It's basically a snapshot of a relationship colored by showbiz and fleeting fame.
Right, not their deepest cut lyrically.
But let's be honest.
Yeah.
Peg isn't about deep lyrics. It's about the infectious groove and the hooks. And it has hooks galore, from the peppy horn lines that accent the verses to the way the chorus lifts with those amazing backing vocals.
Absolutely.
All the sweat they poured into Peg paid off handsomely. It became one of their most recognizable tunes. People might not know it by name, but play that opening riff or the Peg refrain, and you see faces light up with recognition. It's the closest Steely Dan ever got to pure pop euphoria.
Pretty much.
And if you detect a bit more glee in Fagen's lead vocal on this one, it's because by the time they finished it, he was likely delirious with relief. In the context of the album, Peg serves as a bright, tightly focused centerpiece, a palate cleanser of catchy, radio-friendly vibe amid the more sprawling tracks.
Home at Last is actually a personal favorite of Fagen's, a somewhat understated track that often flies under the radar compared to the hits, yet it's absolutely essential to Age's fabric.
Okay.
It's a mid-tempo groove with a deep, bluesy undercurrent dressed up as an easygoing shuffle. If you listen casually, you might just hear a pleasant R&B tune about finally finding one's footing. But peel back the layers and you find a sly, modern retelling of the Odyssey, yes, the ancient Greek epic, set to a New Orleans-style rhythm.
Homer in a Steely Dan song.
Trust Steely Dan to slip Homeric references into a smooth pop song and make it feel completely natural.
That's a fascinating layer to uncover. So the key to Home at Last feel is the drumming of Bernard Purdie. He lays down his trademark shuffle, The same basic groove he'd later claim as the Purdy Shuffle when Jeff Porcaro borrowed it for Toto's Rosanna. It's a swinging, syncopated pattern with ghost notes that give it a rolling motion. What does that particular drum pattern contribute to the Odyssey narrative?
Well, over that, Chuck Rainey's bass bounces along, and Paul Griffin on keyboards and Victor Feldman on vibraphone add color. The whole track has a lilting, shuffling vibe. Imagine a weary traveler finally cruising into port, feet tapping with relief. In fact, that's essentially what the lyric portrays. Home at last, the refrain of a wandering soul who's found harbor but is pondering if he's truly safe from temptation. The hurricane and sirens song in the verses are direct nods to Odysseus's trials. Harmonically and structurally, Home at Last is deceptively clever. It flows so easily that you might miss its subtle sophistication. The chords and melody have a gospel blues flavor anchored by tasty horn riffs that punctuate the chorus. Tom Scott arranged the horns here too, though they are used sparingly.
They were very proud of the lyrics on this one. It's basically the story of Odysseus and the sirens transplanted into a soul song. Well, the danger on the rocks is surely past, still I remain tied to the mast, Fagen sings, directly referencing Odysseus having himself lashed to the mast to resist the siren's call. It's about temptation. Even once you think you're home and safe, you still have to keep your wits, because old habits and lures die hard. What's the broader implication of that message in the context of their own lives or the album's themes?
Precisely. Beneath the attractive flow of words and music, there's a deeper reflection on the restlessness that can persist even when all seems well. That's something Walter and Fagen could absolutely relate to. At the height of their success, they still felt a bit unmoored, always looking for the next horizon.
Makes sense.
Musically, one of Fagen's favorite moments on the whole album is the instrumental break in Home at Last. There's a section where everything builds and you hear a short but fiery guitar solo. Fun fact, that solo is played by Walter Becker.
Oh, Becker played it.
Yeah. He didn't often take solos on Aja, given all the session players around, but here he stepped up and delivered a wonderfully quirky lead with a bit of a Django Reinhardt feel, angular and unexpected, almost Django-esque, as one critic put it.
Interesting.
In their original jokey liner notes, they teased that Walter's guitar and the lyric were pointlessly obscene on this tune, a bit of hyperbole, of course. In truth, his guitar solo adds character to an otherwise smooth track, like a sly grin appearing briefly. Though Home at Last was never a single, it's one of those deep cuts that hardcore Steely Dan fans hold dear. Musicians particularly love it. Drummers geek out over Purdy's groove, and literary types nod approvingly at the Odyssey metaphor. For Fagen, it's the song that ties the whole album's themes together. Now we come to the most playful, downright funky cut on the album. I got the news. If Aja has a moment of pure levity, a brief, mischievous wink amidst the sophisticated sheen, this track is it. It's a bright, up-tempo groove that channels their love of jazz improvisation and R&B, peppered with some of the slimmest, most innuendo-laden lyrics they ever wrote. By the time they sequenced the album, they figured listeners might need a bit of upbeat energy near the end, and I Got the News provides exactly that jolt.
Musically, this song is a burst of syncopation and sass. The rhythm section really kicks it into high gear. Chuck Rainey's bass is almost hyperactive, dancing around the pocket, and drummer Ed Green lays down a tight, crisp beat that propels the song forward. The piano work by Victor Feldman is a real standout. He's doing these wonderfully jazzy fills and runs, what they jokingly labeled coy pianistics, that add a playful sparkle throughout. It's almost like a bebop piano jam set to a rock and disco beat. In fact, The News might be the purest fusion of jazz and funk on the record in terms of the instrumental approach.
The arrangement is full of exciting little details. There are poppling clavinet riffs, that distinctive percussive keyboard sound often heard in 70s funk, courtesy of Don Grolnick, giving a nod to artists like Stevie Wonder.
Nice touch.
The backup vocals are also noteworthy. They had a combination of Michael McDonald and a few of their go-to female vocalists all scatting and doo-wopping in the background, especially in the bridges. If you listen in the chorus, you'll hear Mike McDonald's distinctive tone ring out on certain lines, adding to the soulful atmosphere.
McDonald again.
It's an unusual blend, male and female backing voices together, but it creates this amazing party-like call-and-response feel behind Fagen's lead vocal.
And speaking of vocals, Fagen delivers these lyrics with as much mischievous glee as he can muster. I Got the News is essentially a brash lover's boast set to music. The words are full of innuendo, so much so that when they handed the lyrics to their esteemed recording engineer to read, he actually raised an eyebrow and said, "This is pretty racy stuff, fellas."
Oh,
They just shrugged it off. claiming it was all metaphor, mostly. Lines like, "You declare you were 3 times louder than triple plaid."
Ah.
Fagen joked he wouldn't parse that publicly, but let's just say it's quite suggestive.
Mm-hmm.
In another bit of self-parody, their original liner spoof accused the lyric of being pointlessly obscene. It's not that obscene, but it's certainly cheeky. The main point is the narrator excitedly telling someone that he's got the inside scoop, the news, on their little games, and he's turning the tables in a flirtatious way.
Musically, the peak of I Got the News comes during the guitar solos. Yes, plural. They feature a blazing solo trade-off in this track. First, you hear Larry Carlton take a slick, precise run on guitar, and then Walter Becker answers with his own edgy, slightly raw solo.
Oh, duel.
Exactly. The dueling guitars add a rocking bite to an otherwise jazzy tune. Larry's style is smooth and articulate, whereas Walter's brings a quirky character together. They're like two sides of a dynamic conversation, elevating the song's bridge with instrumental wit. It's easy to miss amid the flurry, but those guitar solos are gems in themselves, reminding everyone that even on a lighter Steely Dan track, the musicianship is absolutely top tier.
Fagen often thinks of I Got the News as a cousin to earlier upbeat tracks. It's a bit experimental, bit tongue-in-cheek, designed to show off chops and have fun.
Right.
In the context of Anja, it serves as a moment of pure exuberance before the finale. Proof that they didn't completely abandon the quirky, more playful side of their songwriting amid all the refined jazz pop elsewhere. If nothing else, it gives your ears a lively workout. Complex rhythms, fast-flying chord changes, and suggestive whispers all racing by in under 5 minutes. By the end of it, you might need a breather, which is perfect, because the final track gives you a cool, smooth landing.
Lights down, band kicks into a tight groove, and here comes Josie, the grand finale, closing out the album with a bang. Josie is a funky mid-tempo rocker that brings together many elements they loved. A strong beat, catchy hooks, sly lyrics, and an atmosphere that's both seedy and celebratory. They always imagined Josie as the soundtrack to a block party in some semi-lawless corner of town. The prodigal bad girl returns home and the whole gang throws a wild celebration. In other words, it's a party song, Steely Dan style.
Right off the bat, the drums and percussion grab you. Jim Keltner is on drums here, and he gives Josie a distinctive groove, kind of a straight 44, but with an irresistibly swampy feel, heavy on the toms and a snappy snare.
Yeah, great feel.
Layered on top, percussionist Victor Feldman and perhaps Gary Coleman added congas and other percussion bits that lend a slight Latin tinge. The result is a thick groove that's funky but not overly slick. It has a gritty street funk quality. Over that foundation, Chuck Rainey thumps out one of his tastiest bass lines on the album, really driving the low end.
The guitar work on Josie is stellar as well. They had Dean Parks and Larry Carlton laying down the rhythm guitars, which chop and chime in all the right places, and Walter himself plays the sly, distorted lead fills.
We're seeing kind of lead again.
Yep. Walter also takes the guitar solo during the break, and it's a killer. A short, snaky solo that screams and then almost laughs in this descending figure. There's something slightly menacing yet playful in that guitar tone, very fitting for a song about a girl who prays like a Roman with her eyes on fire and inspires dangerous celebrations. That end solo has a bit of dirt on it, which was intentional. After such a polished record, they wanted to end with a little rock and roll grit.
Josie also features some cool horn accents, arranged by Tom Scott, that give it a touch of funk soul flavor without turning it to earth, wind, and fire or anything. Just a few well-placed stabs to punctuate the rhythm efficiency was key. And we'd be remiss not to mention the backing vocal on the chorus. That's Timothy B. Schmidt from the Eagles, hitting those high whoa-whoa notes in the chorus behind Fagen.
Oh, wow, an eagle.
Tim's clear tenor adds a nice lift, almost euphoric, as they sing Josie Comes Home.
Now, lyrically, Josie is a true gallery of debauchery, one last romp through the alleyways of Steely Dan's imagination.
Here we go.
They packed in images of protection not needed, street-late curfew, and all manner of illicit merrymaking. There's random violence, copulation, drug abuse, loitering with intent, and other misdemeanors all rolled into a joyous homecoming.
Just another Tuesday for Steely Dan lyrics.
Pretty much. In the story, Josie's return is cause for the whole neighborhood to go wild. We're gonna park in the street, throw down in the alley, wake up the neighborhood. It's entirely tongue-in-cheek, a celebration of a troublemaker as the town hero. They were indulging their fascination with outlaw personas. Josie is like a queen of the underworld being welcomed back to her throne by her adoring, if disreputable, subjects.
Despite, or perhaps because of, the edgy lyrics, Josie comes across as infectiously fun. The chorus is big and memorable. A lot of folks can't help but sing along to that Josie Comes Home refrain that ends the album on such a high note.
It really does.
They especially loved the little arrangement tricks they did. For example, dropping out instruments for a beat to let the line "when Josie comes home" hit with extra impact. Or the way the last chorus repeats and then fades over an extended vamp, as if that street party is going to continue long after the record stops spinning.
Mm.
In wrapping up Aja with Josie, they wanted to leave you, the listener, on your feet, not your knees. After the gentle fade of Home at Last and the frenzy of I Got the News, Josie slams in as a confident closer, accessible enough to hum along to, yet still dripping with classic Steely Dan attitude and musicianship.
Yeah.
It truly exemplifies their versatility. The album travels from the mellow jazz of the title track to this rough-edged funk rock number, and somehow it all fits together. When the final notes of Josie ring out, you've traversed a whole little universe of sound. Fagen often imagines Josie and the gang still dancing in the street as they quietly exit stage left, leaving them and the audience wanting more, but also fully satisfied.
Mm-hmm.
Aja, the album comes to a wrap, not with the genteel bow, but with the firecracker finale.
Now let's shift gears quite dramatically to Gaucho. By 1980, after the runaway success of Aja, Fagen and Becker found themselves chasing an even more elusive muse. Gaucho would become the seedy, end-of-decade sundown on Steely Dan's initial run, truly their Los Angeles noir album, polished to a high gloss and filled with broken dreams under the infamous Santa Ana Weens.
From the first lazy hi-hat tick of Babylon Sisters, Gaucho establishes a distinct, sun-bleached California mood with a palpable undercurrent of darkness. On the surface, the music is lush, laid back, and sophisticated, the pinnacle of their so-called yacht rock smoothness. But beneath that glossy veneer lurk tales of dissolution and decay.
Right, Southern California dominates the imagery more than on any prior Steely Band record, with sunny LA scenes constantly contrasted by pitch-black themes of excess and emptiness. They were essentially writing about late 70s Hollywood Babylon, aging hipsters, sketchy habitués of the nightlife, and love affairs swirling down the drain in a haze of liquor and fine Colombian.
That's about right.
There's a sardonic humor in these songs, but it's the kind that smiles with a grimace. Each track's protagonist is a bit of a lovable loser or a deluded rascal, drifting through the post-sexual revolution party scene in a drugged-out haze. Not exactly top 40 fluff, but then again, they'd never been ones to sugarcoat their cynicism.
You mentioned Gaucho's cool, urbane atmosphere, but I know some critics at the time felt it tipped into being too slick, even clinical. Was that a fair assessment, or were they perhaps missing the deliberate intention behind that air-conditioned sound?
That's a perceptive question, because while it's true the album has an air-conditioned, late-night feel, and the raw vim and vigor of Aja only appears in pockets here, the detached coolness was entirely deliberate.
Oh, okay.
Fagen dryly noted that critics playing Mozart in supermarkets couldn't stop that either. For their ears, these songs needed to sound like the very last sophisticated party before the lights come on and everyone realizes the joke's on them. In other words, Gaucho was their toe tag for the 70s, delivered with dry champagne wit and an aloof jazz-funk groove. It wasn't about being emotionally cold, but rather capturing the elegant malaise of a specific time and place.
That makes perfect sense. If the themes of Gaucho were nocturnal and cynical, the production process, much like Aja's, was downright epic and at times infamous. They'd always been studio perfectionists, but on Gaucho they might have outdone themselves. How long did this recording stretch, and how many musicians were involved in creating just 7 songs?
It was an undertaking of staggering proportions. Recordings stretched from 1978 into 1980, spanning dozens of sessions in New York and LA, and calling upon a literal platoon of top-tier session players, 42 musicians in all, meticulously recording about a dozen tracks for a final 7-song album.
42 musicians for 7 songs.
Yeah. The arrangements were groomed to an even greater degree, even smoother and more finely detailed than Aja before it. They were chasing a truly state-of-the-art sound, willing to burn through miles of tape and piles of cash. Rumor has it, nearly $750,000, an astronomical sum for the time, to capture that elusive, perfect take.
Wow. But it wasn't all champagne and caviar in the studio, was it? Gaucho seems to have been a technical and personal gauntlet for them. I'm especially intrigued by the legendary Great Lost track. But what exactly happened with the second arrangement? It sounds like a producer's worst nightmare.
It was precisely that. Partway through recording, an assistant engineer accidentally erased their in-progress master for a song called The Second Arrangement, which they had incredibly high hopes for.
Oh, no.
Fagen was so distraught he left the studio without a word. They attempted to recut the tune a few times, but the magic, the spontaneity, was gone. Ultimately, they abandoned it and shuffled other songs into the lineup. 40 years later, a copy of that lost tape actually surfaced, but in 1980, second arrangement was simply vaporized. It's a stark reminder that even in the most controlled environments, chaos can strike.
It's a truly wild story. Did they dabble in any other new technologies at the time, given their pursuit of that sound?
They absolutely did. They even flirted with early digital recording. Their engineer Roger Nichols tested a new SoundStream digital system on some tracks, curious if it would give them an edge in clarity.
Yeah.
In the end, they decided the digital sound was different, but not necessarily better, as Walter dryly noted, and they stuck with analog tape for the final mixes. Chalk it up as an early instance of tech buzz that didn't quite pan out for them, at least not yet.
But this meticulousness led to what I find really interesting, and something that became their secret weapon. The birth of Wendell, their very own custom drum machine.
Hmm.
How did that come about? It sounds almost futuristic for the late 70s.
It's an incredible story of innovation born from frustration. One day in the studio, Walter and Fagen joked, "Too bad we can't just get a machine to play this beat exactly how we want it."
Right.
Roger Nichols, ever the innovator, perked up and said, "I can do that. I just need $150,000. So they wrote the check out of their recording budget.
Just like that, 150 grand.
Yep. 6 weeks later, Roger unveiled Wendell, a boxy 12-bit digital drum sampler that could nail kick and snare hits in perfect time. Wendell became a genuine secret weapon on Gaucho, used to augment and tighten the grooves crafted by an army of ace drummers like Rick Marotta, Bernard Purdy, Steve Gadd, and Jeff Porcaro.
So it wasn't replacing them, but enhancing.
Exactly. The key insight here is that they created a machine not to replace human feel, but to enhance human precision, achieving a lockdown groove that was impossible by human hands alone at that time.
That's brilliant. But I can imagine programming a 1979 era contraption like that wasn't exactly user-friendly.
Oh, it was comically slow. Fagen recalled Roger having to type in endless lines of code on a keyboard, then hit enter and wait to hear a single drum hit.
Oh, man.
Patience was certainly a virtue, and Wendell nearly tried theirs, but the result was drums with uncanny precision, a lockstep feel that gave Gaucho its crisp, mechanical undercurrent. They even tongue-in-cheek awarded Wendell a platinum record for his services, a fitting recognition for a truly groundbreaking piece of equipment that revolutionized their rhythmic approach.
All the while, life outside the studio was throwing immense curveballs. Walter Becker was battling some serious personal demons. He struggled with an increasing drug habit, and tragically, his longtime girlfriend passed away from an overdose in early 1980.
Yeah, a really tough time.
As if that weren't enough, Walter got hit by a taxi later that year, shattering his leg. He was sidelined during much of the mixing and mastering of Gaucho, which left Fagen to steer the ship solo for the final stretch. It sounds like an incredibly challenging time.
It was a true test of their resolve. Both of them felt the exhaustion setting in. Also looming was a nasty record label dispute they'd signed with Warner Bros. But MCA, which absorbed their old label ABC, dragged them into court to keep Gaucho for themselves.
Oh, legal battles too.
The album's release was delayed as lawyers wrangled, and the whole ordeal really tested their resolve.
With all that, it's no surprise that by the time Gaucho was finished, they were completely spent. Becker later admitted that after they wrapped the album, they realized they'd followed a certain line of thinking to its logical conclusion and then perhaps slightly beyond. It was not as much fun. Wasn't fun at all, really.
Wow.
Indeed, Gaucho marked the end of an era. After its 1980 release and modest success, Walter and Fagen quietly put Steely Dan on ice for the next 20 years. But what a note to go out on 7 tracks of meticulously crafted chaos, the perfection and the malaise captured in equal measure. Let's dive into the tracks of Gaucho, starting with Babylon Sisters, the decadent opener that really sets the stage.
Babylon Sisters opens in true style, a slow-burn ode to LA decadence that sets the tone with studied nonchalance. Over a languid, halftime shuffle beat, courtesy of Bernard Purdy's inimitable touch on drums, Fagen is heard intoning the now-famous invitation, "Drive west on Sunset to the Sea."
Iconic opening.
The song paints a scene of a jaded older guy coaxing 2 young women into a wild weekend.
This is no one-night stand, it's a real occasion, the narrator insists, with a wink. The groove is silky and a bit anesthetized, even faintly reggae-tinged, mirroring the character's intoxicated haze.
Musically, they piled on the lush textures, electric piano glimmering, smooth horn stabs from the likes of Tom Scott, and creamy backup vocals that almost lull you into thinking it's all harmless fun.
Almost.
But lyrically, the song carries an ominous undertow. The Babylon sisters get a warning in the refrain. Here come those Santa Ana winds again. For the uninitiated, the Santa Anas are the hot desert winds that in LA lore are harbingers of chaos and bad craziness.
The devil winds. Exactly. In this song, those devil winds blowing in signal that this pleasure cruise could skid out of control. It's a decadent threesome in the making, yes, but with a dark cloud on the horizon. That mix of sultry and sinister makes Babylon Sisters a quintessential Steely Dan scene setter. By the time the chorus hits its third, "You've Got to Shake It, Baby," you just feel right home in Gaucho's world of faded glamour and looming consequences.
Next up, Hey 19 slides in with an easygoing groove and one of their most bitingly funny lyrics. This track became one of Gaucho's hit singles. Somehow their twisted tales still found their way onto FM radio.
Amazing, really.
On the surface, it's a mellow, mid-tempo tune, a lilting guitar riff over a spare beat, as slick and warm as a summer evening, but pay attention to the story. It's essentially a farcical generation gap liaison, an aging lounge lizard trying to woo a 19-year-old girl and thoroughly embarrassing himself in the process.
Fagen sings from the perspective of this would-be Lothario, who quickly realizes he has nothing in common with his young date. One of Fagen's favorite tongue-in-cheek lines in the Steely Dan catalog appears here. The poor sap laments that the girl don't remember the Queen of Soul. Aretha Franklin, a reference so out of touch it highlights the absurd divide between them.
Oh, painful.
Ultimately, the only things bridging their age gap are sex and chemicals. "The Cuervo Gold, the fine Colombian make tonight a wonderful thing," goes the bridge, as our sketchy narrator plies the girl with tequila and cocaine.
Yikes.
It's dark humor, maybe a little too real in its depiction of a creepy older guy. But they wrap it in such a breezy, sunny arrangement that you could almost miss the ghastly joke.
Musically, Hey 19 is all about restraint. The rhythm section, with Rick Marotta on drum, locked in by Wendell's subtle magic and Walter on bass, lays back in a deep pocket, giving the song a lazy sway.
Wendell again.
They kept the instrumentation lean. Tasteful rhythm guitars, spare keyboard accents, and those signature silky vocal harmonies, with a little help from guest Michael McDonald in the choruses. The production trick here was understatement, appropriate for a tune about fizzling mojo. Fun fact, when they hit the skate a little lower now, coda, they're basically mocking the guy's futile efforts to keep the vibe going as the buzz wears off. By the end, you can practically hear him sigh, "So outrageous and so impossible. Generation Gap 1, Dirty Old Man 0.
If Gaucho has an epic of excess, it's Glamour Profession. This is their 7.5-minute crime novel in funk form, a vivid portrait of a high-rolling Los Angeles drug dealer making his rounds on a typically degenerate day.
Yeah, it's a whole movie.
They set out to capture the cocaine cowboy chic of the era. The song cruises along on a sleek, rolling R&B groove, peppered with electric piano, popping bass lines, and a fleet of snazzy saxophones. Tom Scott and Michael Barker both contribute sax solos, adding to the track's sophisticated sheen. The tempo is brisk, almost a disco shuffle, which felt appropriate for a story about a guy who's literally and figuratively moving fast to service his high-end clientele.
Lyrically, this one reads like pages from the diary of Jose the drug dealer, king of the LA concession. In each verse, they drop you into another scene of his glamorous or not so glamorous life. Meeting an NBA star outside the Forum, catering to a wealthy playboy on a yacht to Barbados, and negotiating with a supplier, the memorably named Jeeve McGill, over Szechuan dumplings at Mr. Chow's in Beverly Hills.
So specific.
It's a full tour of the high life's underbelly. Neon lit, full of status symbols, utterly corrupt. The chorus, "Living hard will take its toll," is the knowing refrain that this flashy lifestyle is a hollow one. Yet the way they arranged it, with creamy backing vocals and a buoyant beat, the track almost romanticizes the coke-fueled hustle even as it undercuts it. There's a deliberate tension between the upbeat sound and the dark narrative, which is classic Becker-Fagen irony.
Musically, Glamour Profession was one of their more challenging arrangements. It's richly layered, multiple keyboard tracks, a busy yet precise drum part with Steve Gadd's drumming, edited and locked in by Wendell's steady hand, and a chorus of backing singers giving it a glossy, almost yacht rock extravagance.
Wendell's touch again?
They wanted it to feel expansive and urbane, like cruising down Wilshire Boulevard at midnight with cocaine in the console and the world at your fingertips, for now. It may be the closest Steely Dan ever got to a dance track, albeit one smirking at the very scene it depicts. By the time the outro vamp fades, you spend a day in the life of LA's finest dealer and perhaps feel the need for a long shower.
The title track, Gaucho, is a slightly different animal. a gospel-tinged groove with one of their most peculiar storylines.
Okay.
Musically, it's built on a loping halftime feel, thanks to Jeff Porcaro for the tasteful drums, and a mosaic of keyboards. They blended acoustic piano with a glowing Fender Rhodes and even a touch of churchy organ to get a soulful strut underpinning this tune. The chord progression is plush and jazzy, and the harmonies from the backup singers soar in a quasi-gospel fashion, especially on the chorus. If Glamour Profession was high energy and extroverted, Gaucho, the song, downshifts into a more contemplative, bluesy vibe, giving the middle of the album a change in texture.
Lyrically well, here they really indulge their love of oblique storytelling. At face value, Gaucho is about a guy who is irate that his close friend, or perhaps lover, has brought home a flamboyant new companion, the Gaucho in question, who shows up standing in your spangled leather poncho and your elevator shoes.
What an image.
The narrator's jealousy and confusion border on comical. Who is the Gaucho amigo? Why is he here, he demands. The song swims in campy imagery and sly humor, poking at the narrator's own insecurity. They intended it as a sort of dark satire of social discomfort and hidden desire. In fact, one could read the narrator as a repressed, perhaps homophobic fellow who's irrationally threatened by this glamorous, bodacious cowboy friend, meaning the joke might actually be on the narrator's uptightness. In the more enlightened lens post-1980, some interpret the narrator himself as closeted. However you slice it, someone in this triangle is being ridiculed, and it's probably not the fabulous Gaucho.
Behind the scenes, Gaucho nearly landed them in legal trouble. They were openly inspired by a Keith Jarrett jazz piece called Long As You Know You're Living Yours, so much so that the main piano riff and feel of their verses mirrored Jarrett's composition a bit too closely.
Oh.
Jarrett noticed, and after some legal wrangling, they agreed to add him to the songwriting credits on Gaucho and give him a share of the royalties. So, in a way, Keith Jarrett became an inadvertent co-writer on this track.
Wow, I didn't know that.
If you detect an extra dose of sophisticated harmony and pensive mood in Gaucho, you might credit Jarrett's influence. All told, this song is a strange stew of elements: jazz pianism, R&B gospel touches, and satirical lyrics that skewer a situation too absurd to fully pin down. In the grand Gaucho tradition, it's equal parts soulful and skeptical.
Brightening the mood considerably is Time Out of Mind, which kicks off side B like a birth of slick, radio-friendly joy. This one was the other single from the album, a deceptively cheery pop tune with a rocking chorus and an earworm hook.
Yeah, sounds so upbeat.
Many casual listeners probably grooved along to it without picking up on its true subject matter. You wouldn't necessarily guess from the buoyant horn arrangement and upbeat chorus, but Time Out of Mind is quintessential Steely Dan subterfuge. It's a song about heroin.
There it is.
Yes. Behind the infectious rhythm and the almost celebratory sound, they're detailing a rendezvous with Lady H. The lyric, "Tonight when I chase the dragon," is a dead giveaway to those in the know.
They wrapped this dark theme in one of their most appealing musical packages. The track is propelled by a tight kind of New York shuffle groove, with legendary studio cats like Rick Marotta on drums and Anthony Jackson on bass, locking it down.
Top players.
The icing on the cake is an all-star horn section. You can hear David Sanborn's alto sax wailing and the Brucker brothers punching in with brass hooks. The horns punctuate the verses and lift the choruses, giving the whole song a bright, infectious energy. Add to that the glossy backing vocals, courtesy of Michael McDonald, Patty Austin, and Valerie Simpson. They stacked the deck on those harmonies, and you have something that sounds like a joyful sing-along. The chorus refrain, "You Be on Magic Carpet Ride," has an almost gospel exuberance.
But of course, the joy is ironic. The narrator is seducing someone, or himself, into joining him for a narcotic escape, promising perfection and grace via syringe. It's one of their darkest jokes. Conflating religious ecstasy with the bliss of heroin oblivion.
Right.
They present the addiction as if it were a mystical journey, complete with uplifting music to match the false promise. It's subtle enough to fly over a lot of heads. At the time, some thought Time Out of Mind was just a playful love song. In reality, it's stealth tragedy delivered in a shiny wrapper.
Notably, they invited Mark Knopfler of Dire Straits to play lead guitar on this track. He adds a few tasty, sinuous Stratocaster licks throughout, though they were so precise in editing that only about 40 seconds of Mark's playing made the final cut.
Only 40 seconds of Knopfler. Wow! What's there is choice. Consider it quality over quantity. All in all, Time Out of Mind is Gaucho's paradox in microcosm. Smooth, pleasant, and groovy on the outside, with a sly dose of poison at its core. Now we arrive at My Rival, perhaps the most oddball track on the album. It's a personal favorite of Fagen's in terms of atmosphere. This song has a distinct, ominous groove that sets it apart.
Okay.
The feel is almost new wave noir. A sparse, sinister bass line pulsing against a cold, insistent drum beat with Steve Gadd keeping it tight and minimal, with choppy rhythm guitars slicing in and out. There's something about the texture that always reminded Fagen of a scene from a late-night thriller, Shadows on the Wall, a detective tailing his mark through rain-slick streets.
Yeah, I can hear that.
In fact, the lyrics reinforce that vibe by referencing detectives and film charades, giving the song a subtle film noir flavor. They even employed a bit of then modern synth coloring here and there, accenting the Talking Heads-esque groove that underpins the track.
Lyrically, My Rival is vintage Steely Dan mischief. They never explained this one at the time, letting fans theorize over the years, and boy have they ever. On the surface, it's a man obsessed with defeating his rival, enlisting private eyes and harboring violent fantasies. "I've got a case of dynamite I could hold out here all night," goes one chilling line.
Oof.
But who exactly is this rival? They left it intentionally ambiguous, creating a kind of psychological character sketch. One particularly twisted interpretation that some listeners have proposed. The narrator's rival is his own young child, as in a deranged new father jealous of the attention his infant son receives from the mother. What are some of the clues that support this unsettling interpretation?
Well, the lyrics do drop odd clues. I still recall when I first held your tiny hand in mine, but now it's stomping time. And references to a scar-faced, hearing-impaired little foe certainly add to the bizarre image.
It's unsettling.
Fagen won't confirm or deny that reading, but he will say the song's ominous tone and dark humor support something profoundly dysfunctional at its heart. It's definitely not just guy hates another guy over a woman in any standard way.
Right.
Musically, they tried to match that unsettling narrative with an edgy, minimalist arrangement. The verses are almost skeletal, just bass, drums, a bit of Fender Rhodes, and eerie backing vocals from Fagen and crew. They wanted tension and space. Michael McDonald makes another appearance, adding ghostly background harmonies that swirl around, particularly in the chorus where Fagen repeats, "My rival, show me my rival."
McDonald's everywhere on these albums.
He really is.
Yeah.
The bridge introduces an unexpectedly pretty chord change, a brief moment of tenderness before the paranoia sets back in. By the end, the song kind of hangs in the air unresolved, like a threat unfulfilled. Gaucho is often remembered for its gloss, but My Rival proves they could still get strange and spooky even within their high-fidelity playground. It's the album's little psychodrama, and if it leaves you uneasy, then mission accomplished.
For the finale, they close the curtains with Third World Man, a slow, melancholic track that stands apart from the rest of the album in mood. This song has an interesting history, actually. It began life during the Oja sessions a few years earlier under the working title, Were You Blind That Day?
An older track.
They dusted it off and completed it for Gaucho, making it the last track almost by happenstance. It replaced the vanished second arrangement in the running order. Fittingly, Third World Man sounds like a Twilight epilogue. It's a minor key lament, dirge-like and lush, which in hindsight feels like a requiem for Steely Dan's first era.
The arrangement is notably stripped down and soulful. They lean heavily on the rich interplay of guitars and keyboards here. Larry Carlton delivers a gorgeous, emotive lead guitar performance throughout the song, one of Fagen's favorite solos on any Dan record. Larry just nails the weary, resigned tone.
Carlton again, wow.
Behind him, there's tasteful support from Steve Kahn on rhythm guitar and lovely keyboard textures from Joe Sample and Rob Mancy. The rhythm section features Chuck Rainey on bass and Steve Gadd on drums, playing with absolute restraint. Slow, measured, in the pocket. No fancy grooves or irony this time, just a slow burn. The harmonies in the chorus have a bittersweet, almost pleading quality as the backup singers shadow Fagen's lead vocal line. Everything is dialed back to let the song's emotional weight sink in.
As for the lyrics, they're among their most oblique and haunting. The Third World Man in question seems to be a troubled soul bunkered in a suburban home, possibly a war veteran or delusional outcast, seeing threats and fireworks and unrest in the streets. He's singing Yellow Peril in the Glory Days, images of paranoia, old battles on the brain.
Heavy stuff.
They paint a surreal picture. A man in a bunker made of sand. Neighbors screaming. The city on edge. It's never clear if their narrator is truly dangerous or merely lost in his own mind. The song doesn't resolve his story. It just lets him sit there in his darkening world. Coming at the end of an album full of decadent jokers and neurotic city dwellers, this track feels like zooming out to a wider angle, finding one lonely, possibly broken figure in the aftermath of all that chaos.
Third World Man carries a profound melancholy weight that Fagen thinks reflected how Walter and he felt by the end of making Gaucho. There's exhaustion in it, but also a strange beauty. As the final notes fade, with Larry Carlton's guitar gently weeping away, Gaucho ends not with a bang, but with a sigh. In context, it was a very fitting last word for Steely Dan's original run.
So how did these two masterpieces truly compare, especially considering their critical and popular reception upon release versus their enduring legacy? Aja was, of course, an immediate triumph. When it was released in September 1977, Fagen and Becker had a feeling they'd made something special, but they couldn't have predicted just how warmly it would be received.
You're right. The album quickly became their most successful release ever, eventually going on to multi-platinum status. It spawned hit singles like Peg and Deacon Blues, garnered swaths of critical acclaim, and of course, won that prestigious engineering Grammy.
Huge success.
Years later, Ajer would be inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame in 2003 as a recording of lasting significance. Its reputation has endured, often cited as the pinnacle of jazz rock or the quintessential yacht rock album, though Fagen never cared for that term.
No, he hates that term.
New generations keep discovering it, drawn in by that seductive, crystal-clear sound. Engineers and producers dissect it to understand how to make records sound that good. Musicians still hold up the solos as high-water marks of musicality. There's even a whole audiophile subculture that upgrades their stereos just to hear Aja in ever more clarity, proving its unparalleled sonic legacy.
Gaucho, on the other hand, was initially perceived as cooler, more distant, the opposite of Aja, as one engineer put it. The pristine production and tightly controlled performances struck some as too polished, even sterile, and the emotional core was easy to miss under the glossy surface.
Yeah, it got some flack for that.
It didn't help that the musical winds of the early 80s were blowing in new directions, with punk and new wave making their painstaking studio confections seem even more against the grain. In many ways, Gaucho was out of step with its time. But like many Steely Dan records, Gaucho had the last laugh. Over the decades, how has the album's reputation grown, and what layers have audiophiles and devoted fans discovered within its grooves?
It's a classic case of an album needing time to be truly appreciated. Over the decades, the album's reputation has grown, its subtleties increasingly appreciated. Audiophiles and devoted fans relish the near-perfect sound in the mix, so clear you can pick out every conga hit and guitar chuckle and find a depth in the songs that initial listeners sometimes missed.
The slow burn.
Exactly. What once felt clinically clean now reveals soulful grace lurking amidst the grooves. The album's sunlit LA versus darkness concept has been recognized as a cohesive artistic statement, a sardonic snapshot of an era's end. Tracks like Babylon Sisters and Hey 19 have become classics in their own right, emblematic of their rise storytelling and smooth jazz fusion. So while Aja was an instant classic, Gaucho became a slow burn masterpiece.
Both albums truly represent the culmination of their early career. They proved that you could marry literary lyrics with complex jazz harmonies and polished production and still have popular success.
A huge achievement.
Their lasting influence is huge, spanning indie rockers to hip-hop producers. You can hear Black Cow sampled in Lord Tariq and Peter Guns' Deja Vu, Uptown Baby. Whenever you hear a modern track described as Steely Dan-esque, you can suspect AJ is often the direct reference point, that smooth, jazzy, impeccably recorded vibe.
Revisiting these albums, Fagen noted that time has softened any of the stressful memories of their creation. He mostly recalls the magic moments now, the night they heard Wayne Shorter's solo light up the control room, or turning around to see Steve Gadd modestly shrug after blowing their minds with his drumming, or Walter and he exchanging a quiet nod when the final playback of Peg convinced them they finally got it right.
Those magic moments.
There's a dry joke there somewhere about two perfectionists achieving perfection just this once, but he left that to the liner note pseudonyms. Instead, he simply says that Oja remains a work he's deeply proud of, an album where everything clicked. Its mood, its sound, its stories, they all still resonate with him, and evidently with many of you.
In closing, Gaucho, for Walter and Fagen, remains a mix of pride and puzzlement. It's the album that almost killed the band, literally in Walter's case, but it also contains some of their finest studio craftsmanship. Listening now, Fagen hears two youngish men burning the midnight oil to make something flawless. Yet in that pursuit, they were maybe also chronicling their own burnout.
Yeah.
The characters they created, the aging hipster, the hustler, the haunted loner they were, in some abstract way, reflections of where their heads were at after years in Hollywood and endless nights in the studio. If Ocho was the high life celebration, Gaucho with its hangover serenade.
Well put. Gaucho stands as an album of elegant despair, of regal arrangements and sardonic wit, and one that closed the book on Steely Dan's first chapter with a sly, fatigued grin. It may have been born of chaos and exhaustion, but it left behind a truly singular listening experience, the sound of two perfectionists waltzing on the edge of the abyss in 44 time.
We've journeyed through the unparalleled sonic landscapes of Aja and Gaucho, emphasizing how Steely Dan's dedication to perfection created enduring works of art. Remember, every groove, every solo, every meticulously placed harmony was a deliberate stroke in their sonic tapestry.
So, what does this all mean for you? If Aja is an album you truly inhabit, a mellow, approximately 40-minute trip through their twisted idea of musical paradise, and Gaucho is the last dance of the 1970s LA night, what hidden layers of meaning and sonic brilliance might you uncover on your very next listen, now armed with these deeper insights?
Go ahead, put it on perhaps on a fine system, late at night with a glass of Black Cow, ice cream optional, and let yourself be transported. We encourage you to share what new nuances or aha moments stand out to you. Until next time, keep digging into the depths of sound.